go, but we're just trying to make something of the difficult situation of having a talk by Mr. Alan Shubrook when he's lost his voice. So partly Alan is going to try and introduce what he can, and Bridget will pick up the ball, but we've also got a few friends on stage, as you can see, who we hope will have some reminiscences of some of the things that you're about to see on the screen. So would you please welcome Mr. Alan Shubrook.
As you can hear, things aren't looking that good, so I'll try and go as much as I can, but if not, my wife Bridget will come and help and take over, and then we can introduce our panel and perhaps pick it up from there. So I'd like to share with you today some of the special memories that I had at the time that I had the privilege of working with a very young team of special effects technicians working on one of Britain's best-loved children's television programmes, Thunderbirds. Going to reveal to you some of the secrets and mysteries behind how some of those special effects shots were achieved. But first, I'm also going to warn you that what you may see today may probably shatter some of your childhood memories of the programs. It's 50 years since the first episode of Thunderbirds was produced back in 1964, and it all took place on this small industrial unit on the Slough trading estate on the outskirts of London. None of us working on the programmes at that time had any idea that the programmes we were producing would live on to be enjoyed by adults and children for generations to come. So how did it all happen? Well, first of all, I've got to take you back and remind you of what it was like for me to be a young 19-year-old back in the mid-1960s. The Beatles were number one in just about every country in the world. England had just beaten Germany in the World Cup final at Wembley. The British Mini was winning the Monte Carlo Rally year after year, much to the annoyance of the Italians. And British fashion was the envy of the world. So you can see, to be a young 19-year-old back in the mid-1960s was pretty special. And yet all of this was surpassed for me by the fact that I was working in the special effects department at Century 21 Studios. And there was one person for me above all that I feel was responsible for the success of some of the programs we worked on, and that was Head of Special Effects, Derek Meddings. Yeah. Derek not only designed every building and every vehicle in every episode, he also painted all the massive canvas backdrops on all the sets and produced all the storyboards for every episode. Derek, in my opinion, was pretty much a true genius and a real gentleman and a pleasure to work for. Derek, of course, designed all the main vehicles for Thunderbirds, including, of course, Thunderbird 3 here, you can see his drawings. And of course, in the early days, the series was going to be called International Rescue, hence the name on the Thunderbird 3 vehicle of Rescue 3, etc. Whereas, of course, it wasn't changed to Thunderbirds before the programme commenced. And here on this early sketch of Thunderbird 2, you can see how the original tailplane for Derek's drawings had conventional jet engines, whereas in fact we all know they became this classic model for the final programmes. Derek also came up with ideas for Tracy Island and all the underground hangars that were in it. Okay, so let's take a look back, and probably, hopefully, most of you remember the classic launch of Thunderbird 2 as it lowered down onto its ponds. The giant rock face hangar door would lower into the ground, and Thunderbird 2 would majestically roll out onto the runway. The palm trees would part. Thunderbird 2 would mount its launch pad, ready for a blast off on another rescue mission, all set to the brilliant music of Barry Gray. Well, that's what it all looked like on your television screens. this is what it actually looked like in the studio. Thunderbird 2 is just being flown on 4 thin wires by a technician above. And one of the most important elements of this shot is that fan, which is placed strategically on the edge of frame to blow the smoke from Thunderbird 2 in the right direction. The trouble was that every time Thunderbird 2 swung out of frame, it crashed straight into the fan. The wires would break, and that's why these 2 guys are perched below it, waiting to catch it. And if they missed it, there was a 2-inch thick sheet of foam to stop it from bouncing on the concrete floor. You can also notice a group of plastic bottles in the bottom corner here. They're the all-important bottles of dry powder paint that we use for puffing on the wires. So I'll tell you a little bit more, hopefully, about that in a few moments. Here you can see special effects technician Peter Ragg flying that Thunderbird 2 craft on a plank above. It's not often that I get excited about finding a new photograph, but this particular photograph has only come to light very, very recently. And it's an important one because it shows the construction of the Thunderbird 2 hangar. And as you can see, a section of it is actually missing, so that not only could the technicians get in closely to dress the set, but also that's where the camera was put to film that shot from that low angle. But the launch of Thunderbird 2 from the hangar there gave us a couple of major problems that nobody had allowed for. The idea was originally, with Derek's design, was those telescopic legs were all going to collapse neatly and perfectly into each other. In reality, after a day of trying to film this shot, every time it was attempted, one or other of the legs would get stuck. And so Derek came up with the simpler solution of fixing the legs off solid. He then cut 4 holes in the base of the set, and he placed the board under the set, and he put the legs on the board and then simply lowered the board so that Thunderbird 2 sat down onto its pod. Of course, the legs were still sticking out under the set. They would have then been, of course, detached, ready for the next part of the sequence, which was, as Thunderbird 2 was being pushed out of the hangar, probably by a bit of 2x2 timber from behind, it would get stuck on the gap that was left on the floor from where the hangar door had gone down. So the only way to overcome this was to stop filming at that point, fill in the gap with a piece of cardboard, and then use a pick-up shot to carry on filming. And this, of course, solved another problem. So you can see how the original shot that probably took 10 or 15 seconds on the screen took more than a couple of days to film in the studios. This shot that I casually took as I was leaving the studio one night shows the construction of the Thunderbird 2 hangar. It's built about 1 metre off the ground. That allows for the technicians to get under the set to fix lights and operate the hangar door. And it also allowed for the classic parting of the palm tree shot. And for this shot, a couple of technicians would climb under the set, and they'd each be holding on to brass rods that went up through the set and into latex rubber palm trees above. And on the count of 3, they would swing their rods over, the palm trees would bounce back, and Thunderbird 2 would majestically launch its sequence. This particular set also had detachable sections so that you could get in for close-up shots, as you can see here, where the camera's being set up for this particular close-up shot. Thunderbird 1 also had a very impressive launch sequence as it passed through its hangars deep in Tracy Island, mounted its launch pad, ready for blast-off, while the swimming pool above opened, allowing it to blast off on yet another rescue mission. However, once again, this is what an actual set really looked like just before filming commenced. You can see the finishing touches just being added. Here we can see the hole that's been cut in the set for the swimming pool to retract. Now the swimming pool was actually a baking tray full of water, resting on 2 wooden blocks. And in this shot here you can see a young Derek Reddings. He's holding that fan as close as he can to the edge of the set to create the ripples on the water of the swimming pool to make it look more realistic, while this guy is producing the highly technical movement of pulling out that tray of water that's mounted on those wooden blocks to create the effect of the swimming pool retracting. You can see how it was all very highly technical work in these days. Here you can see a very young Mike Trent putting the all-important finishing touches to the roundhouse on Tracy Island. And once that was completed, it would be built into its set. But hiding the wires was always a major problem, whether it was on the model special effects sets or on the puppet sets. And in the end we came up with this solution, which worked best for everybody. We used what we call a can of anti-flare. Now, anti-flare was a spray used in the film industry for spraying onto shiny surfaces, such as a live-action door that's reflecting the camera crew, so that it would dull the surface down and you wouldn't see the camera crew. But we used that can of spray, which sent a very fine coating of grease onto the wires. Then we take those bottles of powder paint with blues and white and various colours in them. We'd look as close to the camera as we could, and we'd puff the wires with the powder paint, and hopefully, if the colour of the paint matched the background, we'd camouflage the wires as much as we could. The only trouble is, whether it was a model or a puppet, after a while, everything got covered in blue powder paint. Once this was done, of course, we're ready to film the shot. Thunderbird 3 would blast off through the centre of the building. Now, this photograph of Thunderbird 3 shows the largest model that was ever used on the special effects sets. Here's Derek Reddings behind the camera doing some final checks on the shot. And at his base, we had 3 discarded parts from vacuum cleaners to rest the rocket on, because the blast from those jets when they fired was so fierce that if we put anything plastic at the bottom of the set, it simply would have melted. But if we go back and look at that roundhouse, Derek liked the design of his roundhouse so much that he actually modelled one of the other Thunderbird craft on it. As you can see here, it resembles the same shape as Thunderbird 5. Flying the craft was extremely difficult, and nobody in their right mind wanted to take it on, because you had to have a very steady hand indeed. Here's Peter Ragg, and he's flying this model of Thunderbird 1, and he's probably perched on that plank about 1 metre from the set. And here he is flying Thunderbird 2, once again probably a couple of metres from the set. But here he is sometimes in the roof of the studio, probably some 20 or 30 feet above the set, balancing on a plank with no safety harness or safety device whatsoever, trying to manipulate that model some 20 or 30 feet below him on 4 thin wires. You can see how much attention we paid to health and safety in the 1960s. And once again on this shot here, as these 2 technicians fly in these Thunderbird craft, everything looks very easy at this stage until the rockets on the motors of the models fire, and then those technicians wouldn't see a thing that was going on below them. So a shot like this might have to be done over and over again, and even then you wouldn't know until the next day whether that shot actually worked or not, until you saw it in the Rush's Theatre the next morning. And on this shot here with Thunderbird 1 and Thunderbird 2 being flown in, you can see how the vision is totally blocked by the dense black smoke and fumes that's probably suffocating that poor technician up on that plank above. One of the main problems at the studio was lack of space in special effects, and so Derek Reddings came up with 2 brilliant ideas to solve this problem. First of all, he invented his roller sky. And the roller sky consisted of a very large band of canvas, painted with a sky obviously on it, that revolved around two upright steel poles. And when rotated, and they could be varied on the speed of the motor, it actually represented the movement of the sky behind a model or a puppet. So here you can see on this particular shot that I took in the puppet set, you can see the roller sky there that would be rotating behind that particular puppet. And of course, when the camera came in close and that sky is moving nicely behind the puppet, it gave the total illusion that the actual craft was flying. We did, however, come up with a problem after a while, in that the piece of canvas had a joint in it, and every while that joint would begin to stretch and we'd see it more often. And so we had to come up with an idea of how to lose the joint. So one of the special effects crew would stand alongside the camera with a smoke gun, and the smoke gun would give off a puff of smoke that represented a cloud. And he would watch for the joint in the canvas to come round the corner. And as he saw it come round the corner, he let off a puff of smoke with his smoke gun. And if the puff of smoke coincided with the joint in the background, hopefully it hit it and we got the shot. Derek's second great invention was his roller road. And the roller road consisted of 3 bands of rubber rotating on independent rollers that were, again, controlled by independent motors. We had a foreground, a middle and a background. And the foreground roller would have bits of bushes and fencing and anything stuck on it. And it would spin round at a very fast speed. Whereas the middle section, which was perhaps the runway, would go a little bit slower. And then the trees and bushes that were stuck on the one at the back would go very slowly. And that would give you the impression, when you're looking through the camera, that that craft or vehicle was moving at high speed. Whereas in fact, in a shot like this of 0x, 0x is simply being lifted upwards. It wouldn't go forward at all, but the movement of that foreground and the backgrounds of the sky and the scenery rushing past would give you this total illusion that 0x was actually flying at high speed, whereas in fact it wasn't moving at all. Here again you can see this shot here where Thunderbird 1 would be fixed off on a rigid gantry above, and the Firefly truck below would simply be held back on this fast-moving conveyor belt, pulled backwards every now and again just to give it a little bit of movement. But otherwise the 2 vehicles would remain static. The roller road underneath would rush past at tremendous speed, giving that, once again, that illusion, as here in this classic scene, remembering Thunderbird 1 and that vehicle are not moving at all. The background and the road are simply moving to give the illusion of speed. This was used to perfect effect in the very first episode of Thunderbirds in 1964, Trapped in the Sky, where the 3 elevator cars were needed to land the Fireflash aircraft. Here, for example, once again, those elevator cars are remaining static and the plane is simply being held from above while the roller road is rushing past at high speed. And certainly these close-up shots could never have been achieved without the use of that roller road effect. You couldn't pan a camera fast enough along a road to get this type of shot. So the camera is fixed off solid, the vehicle is fixed off solid, and the roller road is doing all the work of giving you that incredible illusion of speed. And I think we all agree they produce some amazing effects. Yeah. Fireflash, of course, was another designer, Derek Pennings. Here are some of his early drawings, and here's Derek on the actual set with his finished model. A really streamlined and impressive craft. Explosions. Explosions and raging fires were an everyday occurrence at Century 21. Hardly a day ever went by, whether it was a crashing aircraft, a burning oil rig, a rocket site, simply a truck, or even poor old 0x. They all ended up in a ball of flame. And normally, they were destroyed beyond destruction any further. But of course, then the task came of the crew coming in to put that fire out as quickly as possible, to try and save as much of the set as possible, because you never really knew whether you were going to have to film that shot again until you saw it the next day. And if it didn't work for any reason, there's an awful lot of work to be done to put that shot back in the camera again. So it was all hands to the pump to try and save the set from total destruction, but obviously elements like trees and surrounding dressings on the set would be the first to go up in flames, and so I would often have to spend many evenings and days just simply replenishing the stock of trees that were destroyed from the raging fires that went on the special effects sets. One of the things that certainly didn't mix when it came to explosions was water and electricity. Here's a typical example of what happens when this ocean-based model is blown up. And the cold water from those tanks hits the red-hot glass from the 10 kilowatt lamps that are around it. The glass in the lamps would probably shatter and the glass would splinter down onto the crew below. So you can see it's a fairly sort of hairy, risky business to be around when those sort of shots were being done. You can see here a typical shot of an explosion being relit. What used to happen was that after a vehicle had crashed and been exploded, Derek was never really satisfied with that. So we then put the fire out with our extinguishers. We'd then pour buckets of petrol gel all over the set. And somebody would then go in with a long taper, because you wouldn't get near enough with a match, and light that petrol gel that would give that set one final blast of destruction. Plastic kits were one of the largest components that we ever used in the studio, and nearly every single building and half the vehicles were covered in pieces of airfix girder bridge kits and airfix footbridge kits. If we take a close look, we can even see up in the top corner there are some parts from a one-man hovercraft kit that were produced back in the early 1960s, just stuck on the wall. Nobody ever knew what they were, but they gave that extra little bit of dressing. This shot also contains the famous lemon squeezer, as you can see here on the right of the picture. And here it is in close-up. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a lemon squeezer to replicate a fan on the set. It's just that once you know it's a lemon squeezer, you never quite look at the set in the same light again. There's also a group of sparklet soda siphon bottles which were produced in the mid-1960s. These were great little tanks that were used for all sorts of set dressing. The Thunderbird 2 set was also covered in plastic kits, as you can see here in the background. They were virtually used for so many time-saving elements in model making. You can see them here again, mainly parts from airfix, girder bridge and footbridge kits. And in this particular shot here, all these crane gantries are simply sections of footbridge kits from the train sections of airfix, joined together one on top of the other to make these cranes. And these cranes would have been used over and over again in many episodes of many series. This shot here, absolutely covered with airfix kit from top to bottom. And again, even this rocket gantry, the surrounding elements of this particular gantry are all made from airfix. Here's a very young Alan Shubrook. And the reason for showing you this picture is not to show you that I did have hair once, but this particular shot shows my collection of airfix parts that I was using to dress this particular set. I would rummage through the boxes that had all the different pieces of airfix kits in them, because we bought hundreds of kits. We cut them all open and we poured them into boxes, and then we rummaged through these boxes to find any part that would look interesting. And then we'd spray it silver or spray it white. And then, as you can see here, I'm sticking it onto one of these sections of the moon base building to represent hopefully some pipe work or some external dressing. Didn't matter what it was because nobody knew and nobody had ever seen the building before, so you've got to wait quite a lot. But this shot here typifies for me what really went on and how simple we were taught to look at shops and how simple Derek taught us to look beyond the box for what we were doing. We all remember our airfix kits that we bought. They came to us looking like this: the boats, the trains, the galleons. And we broke off all those lovely little delicate parts. And we were left with this bit. And nobody wanted that bit, because that was never used to anybody. And at Century 21, we broke those up into small pieces. We sprayed them silver, and we stuck them here, 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 and here. And that gave us the perfect pipework on a simple little set. So you can see once again how we look for the easiest way to produce a set. And in this shot, before anybody tells me what they are, these are a mixture of food colanders and mixing bowls, sprayed silver, turned upside down, and stuck onto a piece of sandy set to represent a Martian power plant. And there's no prizes for guessing what these are. Remember, we're back in the mid-1960s, and these are all lampshades from the mid-1960s to create a moonscape that we needed. And here on these close-up shots, I think in reflection, we just could have disguised them a little bit better. Polystyrene was used extensively on all the special effect sets. These rock faces, for example, for the exterior of Tracy Island, all carved out of polystyrene. These background rocks for this quayside, again, polystyrene. So whether it was a burning volcano or a rock tunnel, a concealed missile base, or even these icebergs, all of which I made, they were all made from polystyrene. And of course those polystyrene rocks would have been dusted down and covered with white, dry powder paint and buckets of salt to create a snow scene like this. And they look most convincing. But the following morning, we'd be covering them with sand and brown and yellow powder paint to create the Arizona desert. So you can see how these rocks got used over and over again. And of course, they all looked very, very effective. And you can see in this shot how I've just taken an extra few minutes to slice it to the side of this polystyrene with a sharp knife to try and create the layers of rock in the foreground to give a little bit more detail. But we didn't only use polystyrene for making rocks. We made an awful lot of buildings out of polystyrene. This is one of the favourites that I remember making. It was a ruined abbey. And I simply carved it out of sheets of polystyrene, stuck the bits together, and then applied a salt blowtorch to the surface of the polystyrene, which then made sections of that polystyrene melt and shrink away, and gave an even more realistic effect. A little bit of water paint on there, and you create a ruined abbey in probably half a day, I should think. And again, on this particular temple, totally made from polystyrene sheeting. And one of the beauties of this type of model is that when you needed lots of hieroglyphics, you simply took a hot soldering iron, ran it along the polystyrene, and the polystyrene would shrink away like running your finger through sand. So you could carve any sort of shape you wanted into that polystyrene, as simply as anything. And nobody told you what to do. Nobody had any plans laid down. You may have had an odd translations book to look through because there were no computers in those days. But it gave a very, very simple, realistic effect to what is simply polystyrene. And even this temple that I made, totally from polystyrene, using a template, cut out all those arches out of a sheet of polystyrene, and then I actually dressed the rest of that model using the 1960s wallpaper borders that were very popular in houses. People used to put these very heavily embellished gold and silver borders around their living rooms. And I'd get strips of these and simply stick them all over the building to give the effect of some really regal embellishment. And as long as the camera, of course, didn't go in too close, it gave you the perfect shot. Here, again, a very young picture of me, but carrying out what was considered one of the very most important elements of the special effects department, which was our dirtying down process. And the dirtying down process was making any block of wood, which I've got in front of me here, look like a finished real model. I mean, not like a model, but obviously make it look like the real thing. So a model like that, I'd be adding rust and rivets, and bits of plastic kits again, and putting anything on it that might help it look more realistic when it appeared in the water for filming. And here it is, obviously, as you can see, when I finished dressing it, hoping looking a little bit more like a submarine than it did when I got it on the studio in front of me. And on this shot here, a very good example of a model that is only about 18 inches wide, but it's the attention to detail that's put into the rust and the dirt on that particular model that makes it look so real. And Derek really was quite a campaigner on making sure that this was carried out to its ultimate limit. And on these houses that I built, there are only actually 3 flat sheets of polystyrene, but it's the way that I've actually put the dirt running underneath the windows. And with polystyrene, you have this beautiful process on older buildings that simply by pushing into it and scraping it, you could create all this crumbling plasterwork that was so effective and yet so simple. But it's literally just 3 sheets of polystyrene with a bit of cardboard on the roof, and hopefully it's the dirtying down process that makes that look a little bit more realistic. Even more so on this building here, the attention to detail here is quite impressive because, as you can see here, it's only a very simple cardboard and polystyrene model on the set floor. But when we go in closer and look at it, you can see the attention to detail, remembering that doorway is only about 6 inches high. You can see the amount of work that's been put in around that doorway to make it look as real as possible. And if we go up onto the roof, once again, the attention there, probably overdone, but an enormous amount of detail is going into that model to make it look as real as possible. This is a riverside pub that I built at the set and the studio. Probably would have only represented a day's work or so at the most. You can see how I'm simply constructing it out of sheets of cardboard, bits of balsa wood, and the odd bit of perspex for the windows. On the left of the picture, you can see a drawing that designer Mike Trim has given to me. And that picture is the picture I've got to match into because that already exists on probably the puppet set. So our shot of that pub would have had to represent a shot that may have been filmed a few days or a few weeks earlier. And so the 2 shots had to tie in. So as you zoomed in on that particular building and then you cut to the puppets inside, they both look the same building. So I'd be using bits of wood, bits of balsa wood and cardboard just to make a single one-sided construction. But again, if you see the left-hand side of the building, the amount of detail I put into trying to make that sheet of cardboard look like a real thing. And here it is on the final set. And of course, even that quayside, it's a sheet of polystyrene with that hot soldering iron carving the bricks into the quayside. And as a model maker, you wouldn't just make the spacecraft and the vehicles, you'd be making everything that went in front of the camera. So you'd suddenly be called upon for a lamppost or a sign or a piece of fencing. And that might be required at a moment's notice while the director was waiting to cover up a corner of a shop while you made something to help him out. When it came to street scenes, we had a very simple method of creating these. We had a load of flat sheets of perspex that were covered with cardboard and bits of dressing. And we simply moved these around in different directions, changing all the advertising hoardings and changing all the various signs on the building as much as possible so that nobody recognised them from one shot to another. And you can see here on this shot how we've just done anything at the end of the set to try and finish it off. But of course in reality the camera would have only seen this particular part of the set. And of course once again everything was filmed on the special effects sets from a very, very low angle to hide all sorts of things that were going on at floor level. And in this shot, once again, you can see how we're changing the signs on the shops. Remember, we didn't have any computers in those days, so the only way of making signs was taking sheets of hand lettering, which were called letraset, and we'd have to rub every letter down one at a time onto a sheet of card to produce a particular sign. Thunderbirds also, of course, featured many brilliant craft, all designed by Derek Reddings, and here's the famous crab locker in Path of Destruction, and the Pacific monorail. Here you can see it on the special effects set being filmed. And here's Derek Reddings and Bill Camp just trying to solve a problem on that set. And here's the ocean liner Pioneer, I think with Alan, camera, yes? Are you on the camera there, Alan?
Sorry?
Are you on the camera?
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
am I?
wake up, come on. I think it looks like you're on the camera.
Hang on a minute.
Hang on, yes.
Tony.
Yes,
Is it your best side?
That side. Back side.
that's right. Well, once again, you can see here the very highly technical way of moving that line down the ramp. A 2x2 piece of timber, a nudge, a push, and a piece of luck, and in the end you might get the shot. The method of producing exhaust systems on vehicles was the same in every series that we produced. It was very simple and very effective. A small charge called a Jetex was actually placed in an aluminium tube underneath the vehicle. They were set into every single vehicle that we had. And it gave off a very high-powered blast of air. And whenever we wanted that vehicle to look as if it was changing gear, we simply lay down a trail of powder paint on the set. And as the vehicle moved over the powder paint, which was normally either grey or black, it would blow that powder paint up into the air and give the impression that perhaps as that vehicle was going up a mountain, it was changing gear. And by the time you added the effects over the top of that, sound effects, you had a pretty realistic shot. Whereas in fact, as I say, all the smoke is coming from powder paint being laid onto the set. The method of moving the vehicles was the same in every series we produced. Here's that one, for example, travelling along the set, and it's actually being pulled by a piece of wire, a piece of string, underneath the set. And if we go back to the Joe Knight set earlier, we can see here the slot that's being cut into the chipboard for that little tiny Model T Ford to follow. And if we look closely in the bottom corner here, you can even see the piece of string coming out from under the set that's pulling that vehicle along. These shots that I took here of the Secret Service episode shows you even more clearly how that's achieved. You can see here how we're building the set that couple of inches off the floor and a piece of chipboard. And then we would cut with a jigsaw into the chipboard the route that we wanted that particular vehicle to take. But the real secret to the shot, and it was in every single shot, and that's why we filmed from low angles so that you never hopefully saw it, was this rod that stuck out under every single vehicle. And that went down under the studio set into that gap. And at the end of that rod was tied a piece of string that was run to the end of the studio. And normally a special effects technician would, on the count of action, start running through the studio doors, not knowing where he was going down the corridor, pulling this model behind him. And if nobody came out of the toilet, blocked in the corridors and knocked him over, we'd probably get the shot. But it was as basic as that. And this particular few shots here shows the vehicle disappearing into the garage. And again, my shots are from a higher angle, but remembering once again that the vehicle would have been filmed from a very low angle. While we were on this shot, there is one particular mistake in this series that was never ever picked up. Because all these different scenes are filmed on different days, the car going in one day, the car going out might have been a week before or a week after. When the car went into this tiny, tiny garage, it always went in front first. When it came out, it always came out front first. And that's on every single episode you'll see. We never quite know how it turned out in the middle of the garage. When it came to vehicles crashing down the side of mountains, we had a very special technique in the special effects studios for doing that. And it took months of training and was only allowed to be attempted by the most skilled, highly trained technicians. And it's remained a secret in the special effects industry until now. And the way we did it was, two guys would climb up on the studio roof and chuck the model over the edge. And hopefully, with any luck, it would miss the camera crew at the bottom. But they weren't always impressed with our technique. When we needed filmscapes, we had a giant water tank that we brought into the studio. It was so large that it had to be brought in two halves and joined together, and took nearly half a day to fill up. And we used that water tank whenever we wanted various boat scenes and ship scenes, as you can see here. And you can see here the Ocean Tanker Pioneer in that giant tank. And again, this particular tanker, and of course, inevitably, with anything that Derek got hold of, they were always blown to pieces. Once the tank was constructed in the set, the special effects crew would then climb in and start building their sets. And in this particular shot here, you can see it's from the episode Atlantic Inferno from Thunderbirds, where the oil rig is constructed in the middle of that tank. These shots show you the size of the model in comparison with the tank, and of course, as Thunderbird 2 and Thunderbird 1 hover around, inevitably everything gets blown up, gets blown to pieces, and here goes the rig down, sinking down slowly into the ocean, and probably we give it one last blast just for luck. And of course, if that shot didn't work, we'd have to rebuild it and do it all again the next day. The tank was, of course, also used for the infamous episode of Attack of the Alligators. The big problem here was that we created a natural hot swamp in the heat of the studio lights. The alligators were real and ranged in size from about 1 to 3 feet long. And they became so comfortable under the heat of the studio lights that they just wouldn't move. Various attempts were made to try and get them to move. We tied pieces of string to their legs under the water and tried to pull them along. And in the end, we actually had to put small electronic charges into the water to actually shock them into action. And that was the only way we could actually get them to move off of their sleeping spots on the set. If we take a look at underwater filming and how that was achieved, here we can see a typical shot of Thunderbird 4 underwater. Or is it? The truth is, none of these shots with Thunderbird 4 ever have got wet. And we had a very simple and a very clever method of achieving this effect. First of all, we built a conventional dry set in the studio using polystyrene again and perhaps seaweed for dressing an underwater set. And we then suspend the submarine, or it might even be a puppet, in front of that dry set. And then we built a specially designed fish tank that was placed between the camera and the set. And so you had a setup that looked like this. The camera was filming through a fish tank to a totally dry set behind, that you'd walk in and out on at any time and move that model to anything you want with it. We then, of course, added things like air bubbles to the tanks. And then we ended up with this shot here, as you can see, the camera in shadow in the foreground, looking through the fish tank to the set behind, where you can see somebody actually walking about in a totally dry environment. But one of the main key secrets to this shot was this lamp in the top corner, because this lamp projected a very, very piercing beam of light down into the water. And when somebody agitated the water, that beam of light would move backwards and forwards and give you this beautiful effect. And so a shot like this, for Stingray, everybody believed that Stingray was in water, whereas in fact it's behind a fish tank with those beams of light between the camera and Stingray. So none of these shots would Stingray have ever been wet. And by the time we've added those fish, We put in some more air bubbles. It gave us the most convincing underwater shots ever imaginable. But none of those vehicles, as I say, ever got wet. Rockets. When it came to rockets, I think more rockets were launched from the slave trading estate than anywhere else in the world. The trouble was that not many of them got more than a couple of feet off the ground. As you can see here from this launch, when I took these pictures, here goes the rocket. The shot fails, probably the wire's broken after a few seconds, and the rocket would go crashing back down onto the set. And then the crew members would have to rush in and try and rescue that rocket as quickly as possible, because the flames in that rocket are actually destroying the whole of the set. And yes, we've got to probably film that shot again in another 10 minutes once the smoke has cleared. Obviously we're trying to save as much of the set as possible. But as the years went on, and Derek was striving for perfection, our rocket shots became more and more realistic. And in the end, some of our rocket shots, I believe, were as near as you could get to the real thing. And remember, we're producing a children's television programme. And a shot like this would stand up on any major special effects film today. And this was from the mid-1960s on the Slough training estate. The way we actually achieved these launches was extremely simple. Here goes the rocket blasting off to space. And here's how we actually did the shot. It's a single wire, just one wire tied to the top of that rocket. And the wire would actually run up into the studio roof over a pulley wheel. And if you look very closely, you can just about see the wire coming down on the other side. And what would happen is that a special effects technician would grab hold of the end of that wire, and on the count of action, he would again slowly move away from the set, and that rocket would lift off the gantry. And if it didn't spin around too much, and if the wire didn't break, hopefully we'd get the shot. But it's just one simple wire pulling that model off the set to create that perfect shot. And in this shot here, you can see just about the top corner, I think there's a piece of wire still left in that final set. I can't finish on rockets without mentioning Derek's rockets that he built for the Doppelganger film. Derek wasn't satisfied at this stage in using the backdrops of the canvas in the studio for his rocket launches. He wanted the real thing. And so he created this set between two of the studio buildings in the car park to create his launch sequence for his rocket in the Doppelganger film. Here's Derek on the set. You can see the football pitches and the fields in the background. And the end result of Derek's filming, although these are fairly poor quality shots, were pretty amazing. And Derek did actually receive a special award for his work on this film in special effects. But if we go back and look at that rocket, this particular photograph has got tremendous sentimental value for me. And it's nothing to do with that rocket. It's the football pitch in the background, because that's where we went every lunchtime to play football and let off our steam in the special effects department. And so I think there's a block of flats built on there now. But that was quite a place for us to go and relax sometimes. We did, of course, produce two major feature films at the studio. Thunderbirds I'll Go, which of course featured the brilliant Zero X, again designed by Derek. The largest model had to have several crew members to assemble it. Here's the final model on the studio floor, and how magnificent it looked in the film. And once again, it had smaller models, as I showed you earlier, used for flying shots. Now, there was one particular sequence, and I hope I'm correct here, if you're still awake, Alan, from the Swinging Star sequence, which was a dream sequence in the middle of the film. And it required a shot at the end of this sequence of Alan Tracy falling back from the dream set to Tracy Island. Am I okay so far? And it was decided that the best way that this particular shot could be achieved was to find a real life island, yes?
Yeah.
hire a helicopter, and two of the best men in the studio, Alan Perry and Derek Meddings, would go to Portugal and take off in this helicopter, remove the panel from the bottom of the helicopter, and Alan Perry would look through the camera, while probably Derek was holding onto his legs, and the cameraman, yes?
It was a belt through my belt, and he had feet either side.
Holding
And
onto
he
it.
told me because I fell through the hole.
Right. And the pilot was simply told to drop down as quickly as he could and spin round as fast as he could at the same time towards the end, while Alan was filming through the camera. And I think I'm right in saying the shot was so horrendous, not only did it make you virtually pass out, but it didn't even work.
He sold the underpants, actually.
So after all of that, went back to London. The shot didn't give us the effect that we wanted.
No.
And so what happened was, I'll move on very quickly here because there's just a few shots before I get to the answer. Here you can see Alan again using that anti-flare can and the powder paint to hide the wires on the puppets. And then of course somebody would have to go in and clean that puppet because it's covered with Alan's powder paint. And here's a slightly out of sync here, but here's a shot of Clifford to be touched up just before filming, another on the set here. And of course, as I said, when they got back to London, that shot that was filmed in Portugal from the helicopter plummeting him down, that didn't work. Derek went into the special effects set. He built a small papier-mâché model of Tracy Island on the floor. He put the camera in the roof of the studio on a piece of rope. He spun the camera round towards the studio floor, switched the camera on, and got the perfect effect that he wanted in probably half a day in the studio. Showing you again, probably, how sometimes the simplest effect was the easiest effect. And of course, the film had a magnificent premiere at the London Pavilion at Piccadilly, where the Royal Marines were playing live on stage. It's a privilege to be there, and your ears were blown away by the sound of the Royal Marines on that night. Moving on as quickly as I can, here's an all-familiar shot of Thunderbird 2 hangar. Or is it? Or is this the Thunderbird 2 hangar? Spot the differences. The one on the right's got about 20 windows in it, and the one on the left's had a double glazing refit. It's got about 60 windows in it. The reason for this was that when the original stock shots for Thunderbird television series was filmed back in 1964, the format for television was, of course, virtually square, and all the stock shots were filmed at the beginning of the series. So 2 years later, when the feature film was required, and it was required in CinemaScope, and all the sets were virtually destroyed and damaged by being kicked around in the corner of the workshops, they had to be rebuilt. And when they were rebuilt, they weren't quite rebuilt to exactly the same format as the original buildings. Not many people pick up on that these days, but you will see the odd reference perhaps to a Thunderbird 2 hangar in one of the episodes of Thunderbirds, where in fact the picture may well be from the feature film. The only way of really knowing the difference, apart from the fact I think there are about 13, 15 major differences, but the window count is the obvious difference. We also, of course, produced the feature film Thunderbird 6, where Derek Meddings took over the whole of stage 1 to build this replica set of Lady Penelope's mansion. You can just about make it out in the middle of the set there. And here's Derek working on the finishing touches to that set just before filming. It's a massive set, probably only represented a few seconds on the screen. And of course, here's a couple of the crew members putting that final powder paint again onto the field to make it look more green or more brown. And we attached a couple of dummy wings to the front of the camera dolly, so that when the camera looked through the wings, it gave you the impression of the pilot looking down on the Lady Penelope mansion. And here you can see just how little room was left for that camera dolly to run along the side of that entire studio floor. Derek had the camera here, Thunderbird 6 biplane just underneath it, flying over Lady Penelope's mansion. And of course the skyship was again another design of Derek's, one of his early drawings and paintings, and the final craft on the special effects set, and Derek just done it down the shiny surface of the front. The skyship, surprise, surprise, ended up getting stuck on a pylon that was, surprise, surprise, above a missile base. And in this shot, which has only just about survived, which I took when I was perched high in the scaffolding of the studio, the explosion was actually so fierce. Remember, all the heat from the studio goes up into the roof, that it actually singed the hairs on the back of my hand when I was sitting up there with the camera. So we've seen some amazing special effects that were created for one of Britain's best loved children's television programmes, Thunderbirds. There's many more secrets and mysteries and many more fond memories that I have, but obviously it's just not time today to tell you any more. Thunderbirds will go down in history as being brilliant for its creativity in capturing the imagination of audiences around the world. Some amazing young talent and new filming techniques resulted in a television series that, in my opinion, has never been equalled. I worked on well over 100 different programmes at the studios. I made some incredible friends, many of which are sadly no longer with us. And you had to be there to experience the originality, ingenuity of every frame that went through the camera. You had to be enthusiastic, and above all, you had to be very mad to work in special effects. Yet nothing in the past 50 years has deemed to come within a whisker of the magic that was produced every day in that small studio on the Slough trading estate. It was truly, for me, an era of filmmaking that can never be recaptured, never simulated, and never forgotten. Thank you.
Massive thank you for Alan for managing to persevere with that for an hour in difficult circumstances. I'm going to just introduce who we've got here on the stage. Some of them we saw in the photographs, and see if they've sparked any memories. Sitting over there in the corner there we have Robbie McDonald, who's clap loader and focus puller, starting from Thunderbirds. Our puppet supervisor, Mary Turner, who was with Century 21 right from the beginning. We have Ken Holt, who was studio manager, who joined AP Films during the making of Thunderbirds. On this side over here in the corner we have Tony Day, who was a model maker who worked on Doppelganger, also known as Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, and worked on that massive rocket that we saw in the photograph that takes off in the film. We have puppet operator Judith Shutt here, and in the front Alan Perry, who began as a camera operator and then went on to do direction on the later Superman animation show, starting with Captain Scarlet. Just to set the ball rolling, one thing that struck me while we were looking at that, I'd like to ask Mary and Judith. We saw the shots of the explosions, and Alan was explaining about the smoke and the flames going up and obscuring the Peter Rag and the other flyers who were hanging the craft from the rafters there. And what struck me was that there were a lot of shots in the puppet sequences where puppets are battling through flames. I think particularly it was like City of Fire, where they're in the underground car park and there's flames going off all over the place. How much of a problem was that kind of thing for you with the flames on the set, and you're up there on the puppet gantry trying to operate a puppet?
Well, it was difficult, yes, because all this was coming up into our faces. We were just 8 or 10 feet above, and sometimes we couldn't see the puppet. We had to operate it without actually seeing what was going on.
And the heat up there, I've got to tell you, because
Oh, the
we
heat,
used to
yes.
go up, the heat up on there when it was summer, those girls really worked. They didn't go to the sauna, didn't need it. It was really, really hard.
The lamps gave off a lot of heat as well as any flames or anything else that was going on.
Judith, was you...
The worst one
yours
that
going?
I can remember is the pit of Desmond, pit of fire?
Pit of Peril.
Pit of Peril, yes. And that was film cans all over the place with burning rag with paraffin in or something, but it was sort of a black sticky smoke
And the smell as well.
and yeah.
There's no health and safety in here at the moment.
There wasn't any around
There's a
then.
statue all in the film.
But nobody ever fell off the bridge or any of the gantries, did they?
It always looked to me like the most dangerous episode to work on was an attack of the alligators. How many of you guys were involved in that one? What was it like working with the alligators or crocodiles?
That was in fact Christine's unit.
Right.
I wasn't working on that.
Were you involved in it, Alan?
Yeah, it was all the way through. You know, that was hard work, and the thing was we were running short of time, and we started work on Friday morning, and we finished very late on Sunday night. We just went straight through. I had a terrific wage check that month, and it was superb. I tell you what, you could fall asleep and see through the camera. It was, you know.
So who else was on that one? Were you on that one, Robin? And Ken, were you involved in it?
No, I wasn't involved with it on the stage, no.
They probably had to do it behind your back, didn't you, as the manager of the place and all that kind of. So there was a story about an RSPCA inspector coming down to the studio.
I think he showed up, the guy, but I think he joined in the end. He became part of the team.
Yeah, someone must have reported us, which we didn't know about. And as I said earlier, the guy turned up and we took him onto the stage to see what was going on. And it was only a small battery as far as we're concerned. But when we left the stage, I went back later, he was actually doing the work with the battery. So I thought, well, that was
He was
exceptional.
flying the alligator.
There was a story that one escaped in the tank.
Yeah, I remember that very much, just disappeared. And the only one in the tank was Derek. I said, it's gone, Derek. He said, I know. And you can see it. He was there. And I'll tell you what, it had your leg, but he was there. And all of a sudden, it just floated to the surface and he went, grabbed it behind and said, and lifted it out.
Brilliant.
Gotcha, you little bugger. Put it away. Yeah.
Didn't one of them bite off Lady Penelope's leg?
Oh, yes, yeah.
I had to fill in an accident report. No one believed us.
There were quite a lot of people we saw in the shots. Alan, we saw you a few times. We were behind the camera filming Thunderbird 3 at one point for the feature film. And a few other faces popped up. We could see Brian Johnson in several of the shots. Wasn't
yeah.
Somebody who was in quite a few of the shots was Sean Whittaker-Cook. Memories of Sean.
And the story I told you this morning, if you looked at the last big shot where the camera's, the dolly is tracking down, the guy at the back was Frank. The grip. That was him. So if ever you see that again, just look out for him, he's at the back.
Who's Frank then? I wasn't in it.
He was our, on a camera crew, you've got, if you've got a dolly, you've got the grip, clapper boy, focus puller, camera operator, and the grip is the guy that pushes the dolly along or pulls it backwards. But unfortunately, Frank had quite a bad limb. And I made a gag of it this morning, that it was like a hot slop, so he was our threat. So the only one we didn't go.
The camera didn't move very often, did it?
Only
That was the reason.
elevated.
So who were some of the other personalities at the studio that we might have never heard of? There must have been all sorts of characters working there.
There was a chap that used to laugh.
That was laughing, Wally.
And
If he started laughing, the whole studio
and
went on for
everybody
ages.
could hear it, and you'd think he was going to kill himself at the end through laughing.
And then we had the cleaning lad, the Asian lad, Wajid Ali, and he used to use the dark room because he was a Muslim, and we'd go in there praying at different times of the day. And if a magazine had run out, and then clap a load up, they go and get a reload of mag, we're knocking on the door when we go into our own. But yeah, I think he went to ask Ken whether he could use the dark rooms. So yeah.
And who were the other key players, would you say, who were involved? Derek Meddings mentioned a lot. Who were the big
Ian Weaver on special effects.
I saw Jimmy Elliott there, did you?
Jimmy was the camera operator, good camera operator, Jimmy.
Mike Wilson was in there one of those.
And Harry Oates did quite a lot on it as well.
And Paddy Seal.
Paddy Still, he was on the puppet side. Ian Struthers,
Yes.
yeah. John Reed was the other camera, DOP, Director of Photography. Everyone was important, really was. You know, and if we were changing sets or whatever, things needed sweeping up, it wasn't anybody's job. You just get grabbed the floor and everyone had muck in. That was the name of the game. I think that's what made the series a success. That everybody was interested in the end product and what it was going to look like. So a lot of effort was put in all round.
So what was the day like working at Century 21 Studios? That's sort of fascinating. What was it actually like doing it? Did everyone live pretty much nearby? Did you sort of come and clock in the morning at a set time?
No, we didn't have a clock.
We didn't clock in.
It was raised one day that they might use it, but I think Derek blew it up. But what the pictures did show a lot was what I was trying to explain to everyone this morning. We had a rep who was the most hard-worked fire extinguisher rep in the world, I think, because usually one person buys a fire extinguisher to last for years. He was bringing 30 or 40 a week, and we used every one of them. That's quite amazing.
Yeah, on the puppet stage it was exactly the same. You got in, you got stuck in. If we could get through it, we tried to get through 4 minutes a day. That's what we were trying to do, which was really quite difficult, but you had to stay on schedule the best way you could, because they didn't like overtime. But on the other occasion, we used to have to do it.
Quite a strong union presence there.
There was earlier. The ETU was a very, Electrical Trade Union was a very strong union, and it was, that got unpleasant at times. But it's all about people, isn't it? At the end of the day, when they've been there a while.
I believe the unions realised we were a union, and I think that was accepted eventually.
Yeah. Because you couldn't touch a lot in the early days, not really, you know. You'd have a walkout.
I nearly caused a strike because I plugged the hairdryer in.
That's right, yeah. In one of his boxes.
So then we insisted that they all went, the sparks came up and plugged the puppets in. That's who stopped it.
Yeah.
Instead of rushing up and down, they weren't going to do that, were they?
They come up and down the space. Yeah.
There was there were separate teams working at the studios, weren't there? So there were, from talking to Tony yesterday, there was different teams within the model shop as well, weren't there? Tony was saying you were on the dirtying down.
No, I was on the model making.
Oh, sorry.
And they went to Brian Smithers for dirtying down and fine detail to be added and the graphics.
Right.
And the series workshop, which was across the corridor in the art department, they were working on perhaps 2 series simultaneously. We interchanged materials and tools sometimes to help each other out, but we were separate teams because Doppelganger was the latest thing, the first live action film.
So were you involved in that rocket launch that we saw
I was there, I saw the first one, and then a day or so later they'd done some more launches, and that's when one of those accidents that Alan was talking about must have happened, and it got very severely scorched, but it wasn't destroyed. So there were 4 of us, and we stayed till approximately midnight. And I don't know how that was worked out in the end, but we sat round in the paint shop on a table about the same diameter as that one. And there were 2 standing and 2 sitting, and we would rotate the rocket as we filled in the damage, sanded it in various grades of paper, and moved it around again until we filled all the imperfections, and then another coat of white primer, which was called Cranko, by the people in there. I never did discover where they got that name from, but it was made by the Trimite Paint Company. It was a quick drying cellulose dry rub wood filler. That was the technical description, but I'd never seen it before or since. And when I left the studios, when it was closed actually, we were sort of made redundant, and on the doppelganger team at least, I did some more work when I got back home into the Midlands, and I wanted some of this white stuff because it was such marvellous filler, because on that big rocket that we did, there was no paint finish top coat on it. It was just the filler coat, which was really adequate because you didn't need to wait for it to dry, and you were halfway to getting your dirty down finish on it because it was slightly porous and it would absorb whatever people wanted to dribble on it or chalk on it or to make scorch marks and whatever. Anyway, I succeeded in getting a gallon of stuff from the Trimite company, but it was not the same mix, and I had to rub at it a bit harder and it took a little bit longer to dry, but it did the job. But if anybody knows how or why Cranko came about, please let me know.
And you were telling us yesterday there was a friendly chap, you were nearby to the Mars bar factory, and there was a guy that used to bring supplies down.
I was trying to think of his name, yes.
Can I just chip in? I've got a right long drive ahead of me, and I would like to get underway. Audience, if you can, if you've got any questions for me or anything, I've got to tell you, you've been a great bunch. It's been really, really difficult from my point of view. But you will excuse me, won't you? We've got a long drive. Do apologise, but I've really enjoyed your company. Hope you've enjoyed mine. I'll see you again now, Matt.
See you later. Yeah. Cheers, Alan.
Thank you. Cheers, everybody.
You were talking about different units. What was really convenient was if you had a real rush, as Mary would say, we at least could have 2 Lady Penelopes. So it found rather difficult with live action.
When you went on to the live action, was it a real culture shock? I mean, obviously Mary and Judith weren't involved anymore, so did that come out of the blue when the puppet stuff was filming, Mary and Judith, or did you kind of know it had reached its end, or was it all a big shock when it stopped?
Oh, I'd gone by then.
Right.
So, no, I mean that was Jerry's whole thing in life, wasn't it?
Yeah, we knew that
Go
was his
to live action.
virtual aim to do live action rather than puppets.
Yes, because they could walk and talk and they didn't have strings.
They had opinions.
Yeah.
You couldn't hang them up and go to lunch.
There's all the stories and like collectors like us, a lot of the stuff that we've got I think was retrieved out of a skip when the studio. There's a lot of stories that everything was just thrown away. Is that true?
I can vouch for that,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
I did.
There's no more use for it at the time. Nobody thought of anyone collecting it.
We just thought it was the end of a rap, of a period.
Yeah, everyone went on to
Retrieve it,
do
go
other
again.
things.
New materials that have never been unboxed or anything, paint and everything, just straight in the skip.
Stuff
Yeah.
still turns up in Slough from grown-up kids now who went into the skips and pulled it back out.
Yeah.
Well, we had to do it in a specific time. You had to wrap and get the whole place back to normal because we were just renting sites on a trading estate.
Right.
And don't forget, on one of our stages, we had a huge tower for big sites, skies.
So how many buildings did you have on the trading estate?
4, wasn't it?
Must have been
Because we had the one the other road as well.
Yeah.
And so the public workshop would have been one, and then there would have been filming stages in another, and all the
Yes, we tried to keep the puppets stages a more or less cleaner area, because if you got some idea of it there, the effect stages were rather grubby.
The gate stage was off our stage, wasn't it? There was big double doors
Yeah.
where they could bring the tank in and out of. And the first time they brought the tank in 2 halves, it didn't fit. Reg hadn't measured the door or the tank. So they had to make a whole new door for that to go. But there was a gap at the top where the walls went up, and then with the girders or something, but there was a gap. So if there was a really big explosion, we would get all the smoke coming through the gap. And they'd have to tell us if they were going to do it, because they'd set off explosions, and of course we'd be jumping, constantly jumping. We had to be warned. 5-minute warning.
Did anything ever go wrong with those explosions? Was there any incidents where it's
Oh,
long enough after the event?
Oh, absolutely.
Derek blew a hand off somebody.
Is
He's got a gun. He's got a gun.
Oh, pop it, not a rubber.
No, actually, there's a great deal of respect for using black powder and fire. I know common sense prevails, but there wasn't an awful lot of respect. It was good, wasn't it, really, if you think about it? I've known more accidents in ordinary film studios than what we had at Slough.
I think Tony was saying yesterday there were some tricks played on a few people by some of the effects crew.
Well, definitely is. They used to blow people up. And it was done by somebody in the Doppelganger studio, I can tell you that, but I won't name him. And
I know nothing at all about them.
you don't know about this? Oh, he does. So, you didn't put them up to it, did you?
Not me.
No, what happened was the gents' toilet unit was attached to the Doppelganger studio, but everybody was free to come and go that were in that block. So it was the art department. There were the 2 workshops each side of a big entrance, which would take a large van to move some of the props out, and a big up and over door, I think it was. And then at the far end of the big open space was a mezzanine floor, which ostensibly was used for storage, but I never did find out. That led to another prank being played by somebody who came round to see what was going on. But anyway, going back to the toilet block, there was a chap there that was very adept at anything to do with weapons and explosions, and certainly used it in odd moments just to break. He must have been bored for a time, but I can't imagine why. But he fitted micro switch underneath the toilet seat in one cubicle, and the charge was put round the U-bend with a battery pack hidden from somewhere else. And the first user went in, sat down, and immediately had the high-powered bidet effect. And the chap that did it, the chap that received it, was Keith Wilson, the artist. And he then blamed his assistant at a distance, saying, "It was that so-and-so Michael Borner who's done this, I'll get him." And the poor bloke Michael Borner was working quietly away at the other end of the art shop. So I don't know what happened between them afterwards. I think it must have been all right. But then another charge was put into another cubicle, not on the same day, but they were the old style of lavatory and cistern up there with the pull chain. And the micro switch was put under the arm of the cistern, and that operated the siphon. So when he pulled at the end of proceedings, the poor bloke that went in was the West Indian carpenter that worked in the art department. I've forgotten his name, but he was a lovely bloke. And he...
What was his name?
He...
that was this West Indian guy.
He's a really nice bloke.
Yeah.
Anyway, he went in and we heard an explosion within, and everybody was collapsing and trying to hold back their laughter, didn't want to be playing. And it
So
was,
you all knew about it?
we didn't actually,
Oh.
but somebody gave us the tip off when he closed the door when he went in and said, "You wait for this," and we were like, for a few minutes, we all stopped what we were doing because there had been accidents. And anyway, there was a muffled explosion that echoed all around the toilet, and then silence. And there was some time before the door unlocked, and he came out and he was soaked from head to foot in fresh water. And he looked out, and he looked a bit dazed, and he said, Man, I thought the whole world was coming in on me.
I don't think he ever encouraged that.
The thing was, he didn't lose his temper. He kept it, and he went off laughing his head off. He thought it was a good spoof. Well, the third one, which I forgot to detail yesterday, was they did it to me. But this one, luckily, didn't have an explosive in it. But unless hadn't learnt about certain things that were going on, I might have been frightened to death. But I was in there sitting, shall we leave it at that? But the doors had a gap like that at the bottom, and all of a sudden a big hand came through with a black ball like this, and there was a tube sticking out of the top with a fuse sparkling. And it had got written on the side in white lettering, bomb. And the fuse was a Jetex igniter wick that was used for the rocket motors, the small ones that made the exhaust effects with, but they were used for model aeroplanes, little jet models that were. And so that wick went down, it had copper core. Anyway, I saw it, and when I sort of froze at first, and then and then I started laughing, and I heard somebody sort of stifling a laugh on the way out. And if you want to know, it was Tony Dunsterville. But it was very clever. I've since contacted him and reminded him of him.
You still owe him more.
Yes. He's still working on effects, but more in the advertising line and things that appear on things on the television, the advertising artificial fruit and stuff like that. Very, very varied apparently, but we had a chat about 4 or 5 years ago, and the next time I phoned him, he'd forgotten anything about it, but I thought, well, but years go by and things happen, don't they? But he was another aero modeller. He used to work at the Model Flying Championships, as was Ray Brown and Pete Aston. And Peter Aston ran the series model shop.
I mean, tell us about Ray Brown.
Ray Brown was the supervisor in the Doppelganger model shop.
Right.
And he had been there for a long, long time, since the early days. And he came originally from Portsmouth, but I think he lived a bit nearer home then, around the Slough area. And I had known him from the modelling day, so when I walked in I was quite surprised to see somebody I knew straight away, but then we got to know other people as well. You saw it's crisscross of skills. And even being here these 2 days, I've met people that know about me, and I can't remember ever seeing some of them, but I know the names, and I know faces from some things that I've read in the magazines and books on the subjects, and I value the experience tremendously. It changed my life. You look at things differently.
Yeah.
And
Ray was very, very clever with models, and also aircraft, which he radio controlled.
That was it. Yes, that
was his.
That'd be like in Thunderbird 6, where the Tiger was a radio control Tiger.
Yeah, well, he would have done all that, and the model car too, the other ones.
Model T Ford gave
he handled all that as well.
Yes.
In fact, he came out when we went to Malta to do. This is well after Thunderbird. We went out to do a job called Investigators, which Jerry thought might turn into a Thunderbird Hawaii 5-0, but it didn't quite happen. But we were filming in a place called Medina. I don't know if you know Malta. It's a beautiful city on a rock, and we'd wreck it and everything seemed fine. But we settled down to shoot the model cars coming around, which we did every minute in Slough. And Jerry was directing. He said, right, action, this was action. Okay, right. And he was going like that, and the car went like that. And we said, right. He said, I'm going right. He went smack left, straight into the wall. Just destroyed it. And then we found out there's freak radio waves in Medina. So radio control was a wrap.
I saw both of them, the real one and the model, and that was very expensive to make, wasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly was.
I saw the Model Ford T delivered on the truck, and it was as they should be. It was all black, and within a couple of days it gained a yellow body, which leads me back to what Chris was saying, there was a chap that worked for Mars and or Century 21, and I wasn't really sure which one he was really working for. And he wandered through all these workshops in the mornings, wishing everybody good morning. And I thought, well, who's this then, you know? And occasionally he'd come around and say, anybody want a marathon bar? And he was handing these marathon bars out to people, which is now called a Snickers bar from the Mars factory. And then the other thing that he did was to spray things for Mars. So there was a little building outside on the car park, near the car park that we used for the models. And he would spray cars and machinery and racking and all sorts of things. And then in between seemed to be doing nothing, and the place would be locked up. And he'd come in and he'd ask various people in there if he got a problem with his own car. There'd always be somebody there that could go and say, lift the bonnet, I'll tell you what it is, and find out what it was, including myself. So he put that right. So the other thing that happened was, I gather, that the Model T Ford gained its yellow colour there, which was fine for the film, but sacrilege by Henry Ford's dictate, which was you can have one in any colour as long as it's black.
Well, the full-size car still exists, and it's still painted yellow. So
yes, I saw there's some photos more recently, so yeah. And there was a story there because I saw Stanley Unwin there, and they were filming Secret Service. They did Thunderbird 6 and UFO were all starting at the same time in the 6 months that I was working on Doppelganger. So from day to day, you weren't quite sure what was going on. And the first time I saw Stanley Unwin was when I went for a meal, lunch, in the restaurant there, and I was sitting at the 4-seat table, and Stanley and the young lad that was playing a part in the series, that was his assistant, because he was the Reverend, keeping his own name, wasn't he, in that? And he came along and asked, excuse me, he said, do you mind if I join you? And I thought, I'm going to get him here, I'll use some on my knees. So I said, oh, deep joy. That is the fundamental of the Holy Spirit. And he looked at me, and he didn't know whether to laugh or to grimace. And he just said, oh, thank you. Sat down and sat there quite silent for a while and ate his food, and he was very nice. And then a day or two later, he was driving the Model T Ford. And there were these funny little roads around the Slough Trading Estate, not far from the car park of the art department. And there was a young lady that worked in the dirtying down shop, with 3 or 4 others, as we know, and first name was Penny, I can't remember her another name, and she had a 3-wheel Reliant van, and she was a little bit heavy on the right pedal, and she was driving around here where she'd have been going around between, it was almost like allotments where people have these rented garden sites with hedges and sometimes fences. And I could see a 90-degree bend, and coming along was Stanley Unwin with his assistant, with his Reverend's gear on, his white collar, in the Model T Ford, which was head and shoulders above the fences and things, but he still hadn't seen this 3-wheeler Reliant approaching at a high rate of knots to join him at the intersection. And all of a sudden, there was a squealing of brakes. They didn't contact each other. He went up what must have been a bit of a verge, and I was sort of thinking, oh, that poor car, you know. But I got this expression on his face. I didn't hear the words, but it wasn't anything you'd expect from a vicar. And it went very quiet after that, but not very long after that, and not very long before we all left, because the film, you know, the work we had to do was finished. Penny actually succeeded in striking something with that little car, and she couldn't get home because she lived in London, in South London somewhere. And so in the lunch break, somebody said to me, you've done fiberglass work, haven't you? Have you ever worked on cars? And I thought, well, I have done a bit. Why? How do I repair the front end of a Reliant because it's falling off? So I instructed this chap who I mentioned in another context. He was the one that put the micro switches under the seat. And so I said, well, what you must do is you must make some strips of aluminium and screw it on from underneath, or from the top. And you fiberglass it from underneath, having V-grooved the crack. Well, the front was, you know, there was a gap like this, and the nose was hanging down there with the light shining at the ground. And so he hoisted it all back, And I think one or two of the other chaps went out, and I was working at that time because it was a lunch break, and I was carrying on, and got some resin and fiberglassed it all up. And he said, "Well, that job's all done." I said, "Well, that was quick." He said, "Well, there were 2 or 3 of us, but I've done it all right." So I went out, and he got it all back to front, and he put all the resin and stuff on the outside of the bodywork. Of course, it set quite quickly because there was quite a dollop of fiberglass and resin on there. And she drove up the M4 that night in a sound car, but looking a bit strange, you know, with screws and aluminium strips all covered in with fiberglass on the top of the car, not underneath where you were. So you're supposed to do that, then take the strips off, grind the V out and fill it.
And there was a story that one of the guys from the effects unit was doing a car restoration at a lunchtime. Was that true? Does anybody know anything about that?
There's buildings.
Who's that?
Dave Mitten.
Right.
He bought loads of Super 7 kit cars, which they're now called catering centres.
Yeah.
Oh.
They used to sell them in kit forms because you didn't pay VAT on them. Purchase taxes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just tell people don't know who Dave Mitten was. He went on to be very famous in his own right.
Dave Mitten became, he used to make Thomas the Tank Engine. That series, the kids series, Thomas the Tank Engine. But he was in special effects, and he bought this Lotus Super 7 and put it on the sex stage. And in between shots, when they weren't filming, used to go over and start assembling the car and then going backwards and forwards. Jerry, and I don't think Ken knew what was going on either, we used to cover it up with a tarpaulin so nobody could see what we were doing. But it took about 3 or 4 months to build this car up, and it was built during the time off time when we were filming.
You'd never know because you'd cover models up anyway.
And what about the UFO cars? The doppelganger UFO cars? Were you there when they were delivered? Because there's some photos out there.
Yeah, I was
like
there.
that.
The little mini motor things.
No,
The mini boats and the big things.
The
The
UFO
Striker and Foster ones along Slim. They were built on the floor panel of Ford Zephyr Zodiac, I think, and powered by an escort engine.
That's right, an escort engine, and the wheels didn't move.
They were Alan Manor, I think, that did it, the Alan Manor Racing Company at that time. But there was a story going around that Ford had a big hand in it, but I don't believe they would have done because most of the time my working life since that period was in car design. And I've met people from all of the people that have worked in the studios with car design. You do not design what they call a tumble home, the angled sides, so that you have to go in like this, except Lamborghini. I've tried sitting in a Lamborghini Countach, and it's murder, absolute murder.
Yeah, Barry Gray had a Lamborghini.
Did they?
Yeah, he said he'd give me a ride in it, so I said, "Oh, that'd be great." Thinking of doing 120 down the M4. I got in there and we drove off the estate and we drove back and he said, "We can do 30 mile an hour in fifth." One of the biggest disappointments of my life.
Barry Gray, for a lot of people, sadly I never met Barry Gray. What was he like? Did he come to the studio quite often then? And sort of,
Yes,
Lovely man.
tell us about Barry Gray.
He broke down once in his... He never took his Fesselbeger home, did he? Because he couldn't show it to his mum, so he had another car.
Yeah, that's right.
And he broke down somewhere, got in a taxi, and went to Hyde Park Underground car park, and got the other car, which was, I don't know what, but something expensive. And the taxi driver was sort of going...
It was a lovely art on TV5 as well.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he was a big nut of the cars, but he never drove them faster than 30 mile an hour.
Lovely man.
I only ran into him once, or he ran into me really. I was working on Doppelganger and I was the only one actually in the workshop at the time. The sun was day and the doors were all open and he walked in, he said, "Oh hello," he said, "I've often wondered," he said, "seeing all these lovely models being made and everything," he said, "would you be interested in helping me out? Could you do me a favour?" He said, "in your own time." So I said, "Well, what's that then, He said, this Thunderbird 6 that they've been doing, and we'd heard about the episode on the motorway where the tiger moth flew under the bridge. And I've got a photograph of the Thunderbird 6 tiger moth. It still exists. I photographed it in October last year at Old Warden, the Shuttleworth collection and airfield, and it's in super condition. It's owned by 2 aero modelers.
Just still got the puppet strapped to the...
Oh. They weren't when I photographed it, but they might have had them in the back seat. But no, they were keen, they knew. They dropped it out to me as if I might not know about it. And I said, hang on, I was there on the day when somebody came in and said, oh, there's going to be a court case, a lady pilot has flown the Tiger Moth underneath this bridge on the M40.
I was going to come on to that.
Yeah, so Barry Gray, going back to Barry Gray, he came in and he said, do you think, he said, do you build model aeroplanes? And I said, well, I do. I said, that's my thing, that's what led me into this originally. You know, I said, I was an industrial designer working at Lucas before this, but I also made models for them when the occasion arose. What did you want? He said, could you make me one of those Thunderbird 6 Tiger Moths for radio control? And I said, well, I could certainly do it, but I said, I'm living in a bed sit down there and I'm 100 miles from home. So I said, I couldn't really take it on because sometimes I have to stay down there. But I would love to do it, but I said, you speak to some of the other people who are local. And I think he got it done in the end, but that's the only time I saw it. But I did hear the sounds coming out of the sound studio in the main really, you know, some of the things that you hear on the radiophonic workshop that BBC used to do years ago. But,
so you mentioned the court case on a trip that there was Ken's looking up. Is still making the nerves twitch, Ken?
Yeah, well, we did all the filming and they were building the M40, so it's an empty motorway. So it was ideal for us, as far as the script's concerned, to fly the real one underneath. You see, we had a model of all this, and we, you know, where the model would go. But what was her name, Robin? She was lovely.
Joan.
Joan, that's it, Joan.
Hughes.
Hughes.
Thank you. You know, the aviation people, the CAAs, they got to hear about it and they were a bit concerned about her flying underneath this motorway bridge, and they said, you know, we don't think we can allow it. So on the day we just had to say to them, you know, well, really it will be the pilot's decision on the day. We could do a close one and then we can cut it and do another one from there. So, you know, we said we can do it photographically, you know, don't worry. But of course on the day Joan was determined, and there was nothing we could do about it. You know, we had a couple of cameras, didn't we?
Yeah.
Big time for us.
Dave Lane, wasn't it?
Yeah. So Joan flies all the other stuff, the stunts and things, and comes down and goes right under the bridge. Brilliant, you know. And they didn't like it, CIA. So it was going to finish up in the courts. She was being, you know, which was serious for her because she was a civil pilot and it was her livelihood. But when we put great publicity on it, you know, like Thunderbirds and all the rest of it, and, there was a big public feeling for her, I think. I think it had a lot to do with it. Anyway, the case was dismissed. And we did build a model and shot a lot of stuff with the model going under, but we did have the actual shot of her going
Twice.
under.
She did it twice.
She forgot how to do it, see, so she went.
I was reading something recently, it might have been in Sylvia's book, which I've got a copy of in my case there. There were some details of when they took it to court, the charge was that she'd been flying dangerously, which must have rankled because it wasn't dangerous flying. She was very skilled.
No. On the contrary.
I'd heard about that, what a good glider pilot she was, even before that happened. When they mentioned the name, I said, well, I've heard of that name, but I've never met her, never seen her.
She was flying the Blue Maps. You know the film
Oh,
Blue
yes,
Maps?
that would have been nice.
She was, you know, you could call her a stunt flyer.
Yes.
And
And,
a lovely lady.
Once somebody that objected to it, I think there was a single person that really made the objection, said that it might have been safe if you touched down and then taken off again underneath the bridge, and she proved through the aeronautics she understood that it was safer to fly through, because I know quite a bit about flying, and if there'd been a bit of side wind or you'd bounced, it would have been into the bridge.
Yeah.
But if she flew through, he would have, at
Enough
speed,
impetus, yeah.
he'd go straight through. I mean, there was a chap who did it on the Tower Bridge, wasn't there, in the
Yeah.
50s?
That's nothing to do with Thunderbirds.
No.
No, there is another thing with
The RAF bloke, he got cashiered for it, didn't he?
yeah,
And packed
with
up
the aerial,
all his mates and never bought a drink again.
with the aerial stuff we doing. Well, we had we did some aerial shots of fields and things like that, and they were shot in the summer, and then we suddenly realised we needed to do pickup, and it went up again, and all the grass was brown, you know, we'd had a good summer. So a gentleman who worked with us called Norman decided that he didn't know what he'd do, and he took a few guys out with him, and they did it as if it was a model, and they put all powder and spray, and they sprayed the grass green, and, which worked. The pilot was great with everyone, and then we get a complaint, which always seemed to land on me. This farmer had lost this lovely sow of his through poison, and when they cut him open, it was full of green paint. So that was very bad. Norman turned up at the house there with a big bunch of flowers for the farmer. And he dropped the case, but we did give him some other stuff as well. Yeah, painted it all green. Wonderful.
It's fascinating listening to everybody. I've been asking questions. I'm sure there are some questions that people would like to ask our guests.
Take the opportunity while we've got them all
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. This is one I'd like to ask Alan if he's got enough voice to answer. It's the famous Thunderbird 2 launch sequence. But the lovely long tracking shot, which you explained, is actually not as consistent as we think, where Thunderbird 2 comes out of the hangar and rolls along there. The original shot with the original model. There are two sort of little hatches just below the cockpit windows. And if you look at them, I am dead certain that they are open on both sides, so you can actually see through the model, which is obviously a bit of a glitch there. I just wondered if there was any reason for that.
The models are made of fiberglass and they were hollow. There wouldn't have been any actual windows that opened and closed. But if on one model we didn't fill in what was supposed to be a window, in theory you could shine the light through one side and see through the other side, which only a fine eye would probably pick up. But there's no logical reason for why you should. It's probably just.
I just wonder if they if there was a way they were pulling her along the runway or something.
No. I mean, sometimes it may be a trick of the light, and it's actually reflection on a piece of shiny surface. Because we might sometimes put a bit of silver paper down for what might be a window, if it was damaged or whatever, and then if the light caught it, it might look as if it's perhaps brighter than it should be, but there were no reasons why you should see through it, and certainly we hope people wouldn't see through it.
Okay, thanks anyway.
Does anybody else like to ask a question? Come on, don't be shy.
I don't have a question to ask, but I thought you might be quite interested to hear this observation. I used to work with a guy who was blind, and at lunchtime we used to go up and watch the TV, and they were rerunning Thunderbirds, and we started to talk about it while it was running, and he suddenly said to us, "Puppets? You mean they're puppets?" That to me meant the quality of the programme was so fantastic that this guy who had no sight and couldn't see what you were producing enjoyed the programme for what he heard and could not believe that we were watching puppets and were enjoying it as much as he was just from the sound of it. And I really do want to congratulate you. I know it's a very small story, but it really meant a lot to me at the time, because I couldn't understand how no one had ever told him that Thunderbirds was puppets, and he'd enjoyed it just for.
I think that's a terrific
No one's
story.
ever told me that.
It's
it's actually quite a good point with lots of the things that we've been talking about this over the course of the weekend, of course, a visual aspect of the programme, apart from briefly talking about Barry Gray. But Ken, did you have a lot of sort of contact with the sound department? Because a lot of the visual effects just wouldn't work without the proper sound to go with it.
Oh yeah, well we did have in-house editing and we did dubbing, and they were involved all the time. You know, whoever was editing at that time. What's it, Waters, wasn't it? We had some good editors. In fact, Dave Lane was an editor at first.
Yeah.
Dave Lane, who I hope you've all heard of, he was one of our editors. So their involvement was really, you know, first class, and they'd liaise with that for final dubbing.
So, Ken, I mean, you were in charge of the studio manager, wasn't it? Was that your job title? That was?
Yeah.
How many people were sort of being employed by the studios at the high
I
school?
think it's about 150, something like that. It did fluctuate sometimes.
So it's quite a big, it's bigger than perhaps I would have thought 30 or 40. I didn't realise it got
No, we had 6 units. We had 2 full puppet crews, which were, much to my annoyance with the union, had clapper loader, focus, camera operator, lighting cameraman. We weren't shooting anything of sound or anything, so we had to have full crews. And they even wanted to have full crews with the special effects, where there was exactly the same equipment but high speed. But you know, it's not as if we had to use 2 focus pullers and all the rest of it. Was it? You know,
It was needed, really. I mean, when you think about it, they needed that amount of crew.
I agree. That none of them were wasted, but
No.
I felt that a couple of the crews we had, like the aerials and the flying with the roller skies, we could have got away with just 2 or 3 on it. I mean, that really was. Anyway, it was all resolved, so we obviously behaved ourselves. I can't remember a single strike.
Yeah, question, right?
Yeah, when you're changing over from Thunderbird to Captain Scar, these decisions made the puppet heads a lot smaller, wasn't there? Maybe in particular, do you remember when John Brown made the prototype of Captain Scar, when you compared the slate and the sides puppets up together to see what they thought?
Sorry, I didn't catch quite the end of that.
When you were changing the puppets to different Captain Scar,
Yeah.
John Brown made the prototype of Captain Scar, you made the one that was seen in the series. But you put him next to Lady Penelope to see how they compared, and of course the heads are much smaller.
Much smaller, yeah.
Do you remember your initial reaction to that? How you
Well, I didn't think it was the right way to go, to make them such human proportions. Because you might as well use humans then, in a way, but there wasn't so much character in them then, I didn't think at all. Yeah.
You sculpted Captain Scarlet, didn't you? You sculpted the character Captain Scarlet.
John Brown did first.
And you did the screen.
The one that's on the screen,
Yeah. How long did he take to sculpt? And was he based on anyone in real life?
No, it wasn't based on anyone.
Just
But you had a voice that got
I thought it was based on Cary Grant.
Yes. No.
His voice was
that was the voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard the voice, of course. And, it was very difficult to go from the Lady Penelope size face to Captain Scarlet, but we had to do it.
And who were the people who miniaturised? Because you were able to do it because you were able to reduce the size of the technology to operate the heads and put the solenoids in different places. Who was the driving force behind that? Was that yourself, or were other people involved in sort of reducing the mechanism sizes and working out how it could be done on a smaller scale?
I wasn't really involved in making the actual mechanisms or how to do it. I think John Reed had quite a bit to do with the principle of doing it and making it work.
Very clever.
Yeah.
Any more questions? We are going to have to wrap up in a bit.
It's just
Sorry, one at the back was first, and I'll go on with it. Come on.
Just to see if there's anybody has a particularly favourite piece of work, something they're especially proud of from the time studio.
Favourite piece of work from the time at studios?
Yeah, the Eurosec rocket, which I had a lot to do with, it was made by one of the other four in that workshop, but I actually had to make a reduced scale version of it, which was used in an office scene. And they had two smaller rockets. One was made in stainless steel, and I think it had a lighter built into it for cigarettes and cigars, or possibly a bottle of whiskey, I can't remember. But mine was in similar colouring to the large one, which I'd helped to renovate when it was caught on fire. And that is seen in Doppelganger in, I think it was Foster's office, the character and you'll see it in the corner of the office with the other one on his desk. But particularly the main rocket, because I was involved in the mechanism that made, as it's lifting, these clamps and pivot arms and things like shock absorbers. I made all that, and the base I made. And when I saw it live, the film, when it was released about 18 months later, I could not believe that was something I'd had a hand in. It was so realistic. So yes, yeah, it makes me feel quite proud. And I've got pictures of it in my case there, if you want to see them. Thank you.
Judith, anything that you're really fond of that you're proud?
I think all of it really. It's difficult to pinpoint any one thing. Anything, oh no, that was good. That was better.
You were telling me earlier on that you were involved in the shot of Marina in the end titles of Stingray, where she's swimming through the water and everything.
Oh yes.
That's a shot that I always remember.
Yeah.
Perhaps that'd be my favourite one.
Oh yeah. Yes, swimming was. I mean, it'd never been done before, so that was really good. You know, to work out how to make them swim or look as though they're swimming. You know. Yeah.
Each shot as you manage to do it right, then you are quite pleased that it has gone right.
So
Because everything was new.
what would be your proudest moment, do you think, Mary, if you were looking back on the show?
Well, I don't think there was any one moment. As I say, just that as you went along, and you did achieve each shot to the director's liking, of course. You felt pleased with it.
Cool. Robin, you've got more time to think of an answer, you said that one.
My favourite
What's your favourite moment looking back on what you were
blowing up Lou Grade.
You can't just say that. Tell us how you blew up.
Well, I said yes. I don't know how many people were in there yesterday when I told the story. It was when he came down. Haven't you heard the story?
I might have done, but
He came down to, when he was buying AP Films, he came down to visit the studio with Bernard Delphon and his other brother, and there was quite a lot of people there. Red Shield was showing around. And we were told to stop what we were doing on the special effects and do an explosion for him because it was more dramatic and visual. The day before, we'd been working on a snow scene, and it's, as Alan was saying earlier on, the polystyrene bits, I don't know whether you remember this story. It was polystyrene mountains, and we used to use talcum powder with salt, and the salt used to hold the talcum powder down so it flying around. And we'd been doing that, and we were told, no, you can't run with an explosion. So we had to wrap the set up, and we used to store them in a gantry above the stage. And we lifted the polystyrene and I put it up on the gantry. And it's still covered in snow and talcum powder and salt. And we arranged with this little cottage to be blown up. And we all used to wear respirators and protective clothing and hats and everything else, and we were filming at high speed. And when they came in the stage, Sean Whittaker Cook, who was directing, said to Mr. Gradle, if you would stand over there, you'll be perfectly safe, right underneath the polystyrene with the salt and talcum powder on it. So we did the shot on high speed, bang, the whole lot went up. and we stopped the camera and we'll turn around and there's Lou Gray and all the others standing covered from head to foot in white powder. The explosion of the polystyrene as well, and the shaking it, and it all come down over there. And to this day, I think they believe Sean Whittaker did it on purpose.
They did have lovely suits.
Ken, looking back, what would be your favourite memory you could think of one?
I really don't know. It's all. I was still staggered by the expertise and talent of everyone after leaving a major film studio to come there and see what was going on. I just respected it all so much. I'm very proud of it all, the running of it, and the final shows what we put out.
Sure, that seems to be something, I mean, that seems to be something when I talk to people that comes from everyone seems to be very proud of what was achieved there. And
Everything.
It must be fantastic to see people so long after still loving it and so.
That's what amazes us, that it's still carrying on and everyone enjoys it so much still.
So I've worked on some other things and you haven't thought about the talk.
Next time. Alan, if you've still got a bit of voice left.
In this interview, I think what I remember from the studios most of all was that incredible teamwork. The friendship was, you know, we were a team in the studio, but in the evenings we were all in one another's houses, we go to one another's weddings or whatever at weekends. I mean, we were just as if we were all brothers and sisters. It was incredible. But model-wise, I mean, I never got as much satisfaction out of working on spacecraft as I did at actually building houses and like the Abbey and sets like that. I could feel more character in that than I could actually putting panels on Thunderbird 1, really. But the actual overall memory, if anybody said, what do you remember about the studios more than anything else? It was just that incredible friendship and teamwork and something that I've never experienced since.
I think on that note, with time unfortunately against us, we will have to leave it there, but please, audience, would you show your appreciation for all our wonderful guests.